Good. Okay. So we have Julie Matthews here today, and so excited that Julie is going to be a part of the Healthy Kids Revolution. And if you've seen the information on Julie and you're probably wondering, autism, I wonder what this wonderful lady is going to teach us about autism. If we don't have children who have autism, what can we learn? Well, that's the beauty of why we have Julie here, is because every child needs nutrition. And I think because Julie has dealt with children with autism spectrum disorder for the last decade, she's counseled physicians and families, patients, everything. She has taught people how to actually combat all of the things that an autistic child faces when having food aversions and texture issues and just the myriad of things that an autism child goes through as far as their food aversions is a huge, huge issue. And I think Julie's hopefully going to address that for us today. And just so you know, she has a wonderful book out called Nourishing Hope for Autism. She's an award-winning book author, and she also is the leading autism complex educator in her field. So Julie flies nationally, internationally. She has lots of experience under her belt. And so, Julie, it is my pleasure to welcome you today to the Healthy Kids Revolution. And we can't wait to learn what you know about treating these kids with sensitivity issues and how you've been able to help people, parents in particular, overcome the issues that they face with their own children and trying to get them to eat well. So did I pretty much cover who you are in a nutshell there?
Thanks, Carmen. Yeah, I'm a certified nutrition consultant, and you're right. My specialty has been working with children with autism and looking at the research that's out there. And I think that you have some really good points that you mentioned earlier, which is that, to me, children with autism are the canaries in the coal mine. They're the ones that are a little extra sensitive and often have more health issues, immune system challenges, some detoxification challenges, and digestion is often not as sufficient. So what I see when I look at autism are, there are a lot of children with ADHD and other just sort of related developmental conditions, or just maybe not 100% as healthy maybe as their peers. To me, autism offers us so much because I find that they're the kids that have the most nutrient deficiencies, that need the most nourishing food, and they're really picky eaters, and they need very creative ideas. They have a lot of digestion issues, so we don't include gluten very often and some of these other things. So I think there is a lot to learn from their experience, even if you don't have autism.
Right. Okay. I think that, when you talked about gluten, I know that's such a huge buzzword right now. And so I am really excited about you sort of bridging the gap for us, because nutrition, I think one of the questions on your interview questionnaire said, we mentioned diet and we mentioned nutrition. So maybe could you speak just a little briefly about that, where you see the difference for parents as opposed to, how they treat their children and how they're going to grow their children to be healthy eaters when they look at diet versus nutrition?
Sure. I mean, I think, everybody, I guess, in a way has their own way of defining these. But to me, diet is sort of the food approach that you take, the rules of things that you include and don't include. So a diet would maybe be, somebody's diet might be gluten-free or dairy-free. Maybe they don't do eggs. Maybe they include lots of good meats and vegetables. That, to me, is the diet, what the food consists of. And nutrition is the nourishment and the nutrients that we get from that food, as well as maybe any supplementation or other things that we do to affect our overall nutrient status or the nutrition of our system. So they're very similar, but I do kind of define them slightly differently.
And with the autism children, do you see most of them taking supplements on a regular basis? And if that's a yes or no, then also, like, how would, for the general public, do you see supplements, vitamins, things like that, taken by the children?
Yeah, I mean, personally, I like to get as much nutrition as possible from real food. The reality, though, is that children with autism and those with sometimes ADHD and various other conditions may not get all the nutrients they need from food, either because maybe they're a bit of a picky eater, or maybe because they have a special diet, like a dairy-free diet, so maybe they're not getting as much calcium and maybe a supplement would be important for them. Or maybe they have certain genetic mutation or a need for a nutrient in a higher amount or a particular form where supplementation might be important. So I think that we look at ADHD and we see the need for fish oils and how helpful those omega-3s can be for the brain and attention and learning and speech and all of that. So I think that they have a very helpful place, but still, my core message is that the foods you eat can provide a lot of nourishment, and also the foods that you eat can also, in addition to be healing and nourishing, can also be inflammatory and problematic. So I think I always like to start with foods and then look at supplements as necessary.
Excellent. And then I guess what's kind of the first step that if, say, a parent comes to you, and this could be an autistic child or an ADHD child, not necessarily an autistic child, but just somebody that comes to you and says, Julie, my kid, I can't get my kid to eat anything that's green, no broccolis, no veggies. Like, what is your attack? How do you first, counsel these parents, and then, what's the game plan that you give them?
Oh boy. Well, I guess it's different for everyone, and you're describing here a very specific scenario that is fairly familiar, fairly common, which is kids that don't like to eat vegetables. I might say that my first step is not vegetables, which seems kind of, strange, but my very first step for someone brand new to the approach of looking at diet and nutrition would be removing the artificial additives, the artificial colors, flavors, preservatives that are just poured into kids' foods, brightly colored foods, cereals, candies, all that kind of stuff. That we know from studies in the Lancet and other places that these additives can cause hyperactivity in children, as well as headaches or migraines or attention issues, irritability, those kinds of things. So removing the junk would be my first step in good nutrition.
I like that. I like that idea because a lot of parents don't understand, and I think this is what I find I'm confronted with quite often is parents, we know that things are bad for us, like we hear that the dyes and chemicals are bad for us, but nobody really goes scientific like you and I are going and saying, you know what, let's look at this on the cellular level. And if you can understand at the very basic part of all of us is the cell, and how when we bombard our cells, I usually teach the kids, and the way I explain it, maybe you'll see if you think this is helpful, but I show them like a water balloon. And so for all the parents listening online, if you can imagine that your children's cells are like water balloons, and if you fill those cells up all day, every day, day in and day out with all these artificial dyes, preservatives, chemicals, additives, those balloons or cells, they eventually can burst and spill over into disease. And so I think oftentimes when parents have a visual of something, it's not only that they know that it's bad, but here's exactly scientifically in the body how this is affecting your child. I think that's a wonderful first step for parents. I hope everybody wrote that down, what Julie just said. The first step is to remove those all the artificial junk in your kids' foods, and that's a daunting task. And we did it in our own household, and I can tell you, Julie, it took me almost a year to clean out our pantry from having all the processed junk in it.
Wow.
It was not a one-day thing, and, our family is not perfect by any means, but I'm trying to give parents that are listening, some tools to not be overwhelmed, because I think it can be overwhelming when we start to go look at our cupboard and we realize how many bad things are in what seems to be healthy items. You'll see the Nutri-Grain bars, and you'll see all the pretty wheat colors, and you'll see the real fruit on the outside, and we're just totally bamboozled by this marketing effort. So I love your first step there, taking all the artificial things out of it.
Yeah, and reading those labels, like you said, and that's another thing. You make a good point. I want people to go away feeling empowered that there's something they can do. When they have a child that wants to eat, soda pop and candy and might be used to that and used to getting that, then to say, okay, let's go straight to brown rice and broccoli. I mean, that is just overwhelming. It's really not possible for a lot of parents because we can't force our kids to eat things, right? So we have to get their buy-in. So little by little is okay, as long as, like you said, you're taking steps towards it. It might take 6 months or a year or more to get the diet to really where you ideally want it. But you know what? 6 months goes by fast, and if you're not looking at it, that time's going to be gone and no progress is made. So any progress is good progress.
Exactly, and I'm glad that you like that. And I could hear on the other end of the line you gasping, going, Carmen, it took a year, but it really, really did. I mean, from my own experience, I think this is partly why I'm so passionate about it. Is my oldest son eats like a champ, but my younger son that's super thin, and this is for all you parents to listen to. It does not matter if your children are thin. That is no indication of the internal health that they are in.
Mm-hmm.
My youngest son is very thin, very lean, very muscular, but I don't think he's very healthy because he still loves to consume those carbs. And so if we're doing this first step of removing the artificial additives, then what's going to be your second step? I mean, do you slowly ask parents to start introducing greens, or, how is that next step transition? That's a good first step. Now, what's our next step after we get rid of all those artificial additives and things in the house? How are you starting to gently bring in the good stuff?
Yeah. Well, I think a good step number 2 is to actually work with things they already eat and make it the best quality you can. So looking at things like animal foods. So this is probably not where you thought I'd go. But looking at animal foods like beef or chicken or eggs and getting the best quality you can. And I mean that very seriously, because it's easy to say, yeah, sure, but that stuff is twice as much as the other or 4 times as much as the other, and I just can't do it. Well, there's always ways you can get good quality, 100% grass-fed meats, eggs that have been on pasture with those chickens pecking at the dirt and eating bugs and things. There could be twice as much, 5 times as much, 10 times as much, or more of some of the important nutrients, vitamins, fatty acids in those foods. So since kids already typically will eat a hamburger or a meatball or an egg, hopefully, then starting with making those foods they already eat much more nutritious, and then grass-fed is the step above organic. In other words, organic is nice, but organic is not the same quality as grass-fed. And so getting to that quality can really increase the nutrient density without having to radically change the child's diet. Then, step 3, I would say, would be adding those vegetables. And the vegetables, it really depends where somebody is. If they don't eat, like your example, a single vegetable, they won't touch a vegetable, they won't eat a raw carrot or anything, then looking at even things like, so sometimes I have incredibly picky eaters that I work with, so they won't touch a vegetable. In fact, one of my clients, their daughter started crying and running around when her dad simply started cutting up a carrot. And so that sometimes starting really simply, like cut up a carrot. I like to make even carrot chips. Yes, they're fried, but if you have a child that literally will run away just from the sight of a vegetable, is to make that, take that carrot in my cooking to heal. I show everybody how to make like a potato chip out of a carrot, which is you slice a very thin disc off of the carrot, with a vegetable peeler or something like that, and then you put it in hot oil and then you deep fry it, and then you pull it out and put a little bit, just a small bit of salt on it, and then they eat it, and wow, that tasted really good. It just tasted like my potato chip. Now they start to make a new association, tiny baby steps. Then maybe if you have a child that isn't too much of a picky eater, they might say, ooh, I don't like green things, but if you put something inside of their meatball they wouldn't know, or they wouldn't be too concerned about it, then you can start to cook and puree vegetables and then add them to meatballs or add them to tomato sauce or whatever it might be. Those are then some good steps to get people going, to start changing the diet at the child's pace. That would be the approach I would typically look at.
I like that, and then if I can add to that, one thing that I have found is I've been able to throw in spinach and kale into my Vitamixer, And my kids don't even, I could put in like a banana, pineapple, and spinach, and they never taste the spinach in the smoothie, and they drink it. And I've taken it to classes of 100 children, and I have the children clamoring, lining up to drink this raw spinach banana smoothie. And people are fainting, going, I can't believe kids are wanting to try that raw spinach, and they do. So I think that's a great point from you, is if we kind of hide things in the beginning, we're definitely getting a lot more nutrition into our kids than they are suspecting. And then how about age range, Julie? Do you feel like you have noticed a certain age range of children that are more averse to food? Like I think my 10-year-old now, his palate is changed enough where he's willing to try things, whereas from like the 4-year-old to 8-year-old, I felt like that was maybe an age range, and I didn't know if it was in my head, that children just kind of had aversions to different new foods. Do you find that to be sort of true?
I think that, yes, there are certain things, like mine as a toddler, and toddlers just want to say no to everything just because you said yes. So I do think that different children, different dispositions and things, there's going to be periods where it's easier to do and harder to do, but I think that it's still something that no matter what age, we're still always striving to make whatever changes would be appropriate for that child at that given point. But I'd love to step back one step, if we could, and talk one more thing about the sneaking the vegetables in and things, which is
totally.
That if you have a really picky eater that only eats like 3 things, I would be very careful and cautious about that, because you always want to have your child's trust. And if they're not so concerned, if they're not so aware about that, it doesn't matter much. Most kids, you can add things and sneak things in all the time. It's really not an issue. But there are some that out there are very picky eaters. Some people might even define them as problem feeders because they don't eat very many foods at all. In that case, you want to be careful maybe not to sneak things in, and you might want to seek some extra support from a feeding therapist or somebody. So I think that there's always there's always exceptions to the rule, but I think in general, yes, it's a great principle that works for many people. And I have one last thing to add. I love the idea of adding kale to a smoothie. I think that getting those greens is a great way. Sometimes you can even add avocado and other things. And as long as they don't mind the green color, then the flavor is delicious. But let me say one thing about spinach. Kale is incredible. Most of the greens are wonderful. I just happen to be doing a call tonight on the topic of oxalates, and I was looking at the research yesterday. There are 2 studies out on spinach, and the calcium in spinach is unavailable to be absorbed because of the high oxalate that's in there. So even though it's wonderfully nutritious, the calcium can't be absorbed from it. And, in fact, it will bind to the other calcium in your meal, like if you had milk or other things, and render that unable to be absorbed. So spinach,
not the darling.
It's an incredibly nutrient-dense food if you look at it. But I just like to mention that to people because people all the time do exactly what you're saying, and I think it's in general a good idea. Get those vegetables, get those greens, puree stuff up, put kale in there, puree up green vegetables, freeze them, add them in. But probably the one and only vegetable I might not choose is the spinach. I'd probably use some of the other greens instead. So just a little bit there.
No, see, that's your latest scientific research. That comes barreling right in here to help us because, as a mom, here I was using the spinach, but now that you've told me that, I'm going to obviously go find some kale and some other things to put in the smoothie. So, I think that's awesome. And then I love this question here. Your husband's so awesome. He sent me a list of questions to look at beforehand, but I don't know a whole lot about fermented foods, and I would love to hear, your take on why they're important and how we might start to incorporate some fermented foods in our daily eating habits.
Absolutely. So when we think of fermented food, most of us are probably the most familiar with yogurt, right? So yogurt contains lactobacillus acidophilus and other bacteria like that. And in the old days, we would get that all the time, right? We didn't have refrigeration, so we'd make sauerkraut so that we could go through the snowy winter with vegetables. We would not have refrigeration, so our milk would turn to yogurt, and we'd get all that good bacteria. We didn't have hand sanitizers and antibiotics and all these things, so we weren't, we didn't pasteurize things, so we weren't killing off all this good bacteria all the time. And there is more good bacteria in our body than we literally have cells in our body. So we actually developed to live synergistically with this good bacteria. Good bacteria makes B vitamins, makes certain nutrients, helps us with digestion and even breaking down toxins and things like that. So this good bacteria in fermented foods is incredibly important and healthy and nourishing. And since our sort of modern diet is all about pasteurized and killed and, sort of almost afraid of bacteria, we really don't get this like we used to. And so whether it's a yogurt, but the yogurt needs to be live cultures. So when you read some of the brightly colored ones and the kids' ones, be careful and look to make sure there's live culture. But hopefully in our conversation today, we'll also talk a bit about dairy, that it doesn't work for everybody. In fact, a lot of kids, most kids I know with autism do very poorly on dairy. Some of the dairy-free fermented foods are things like raw sauerkraut, or not the stuff bottled on the shelf, but the stuff in the refrigerator with live cultures, or kefir, which is they make dairy-based, but they also make young coconut kefirs. They make a variety of other kombuchas and fermented foods as well. So there are many different choices depending on if your child likes fizzy, sweet and sour, sort of soda-like drinks where you could do something like a kefir or a kombucha, or whether they want to eat them maybe like a raw sauerkraut or a non-dairy yogurt or a regular yogurt, depending on their dietary needs.
Cool. I think that is, I don't know how many people are, because you're West Coast and we're on the East Coast, we are so far behind. The times on all of the, the kefirs and the kombuchas, I mean, we have Earth Share here now and stuff, but I love that, I love that you have the West Coast sort of avant-garde. You're ahead of this, of the cycle a lot of times, as far as these new things to eat and what we should be eating, what quantities, where to get them, that kind of thing. And so was that you also said I wanted to go back to dairy. Do you want to mention the issues with dairy and how it's affecting us and affecting the children in general?
Sure. So a couple things. So food allergies are more common for autism and ADHD. Food sensitivities, which is not a food allergy where you're afraid of a life-threatening anaphylaxis or anything like that, but food sensitivity is more of a delayed inflammatory type response that creates things like diarrhea and constipation, maybe hyperactivity or irritability, things like that. They're a little bit more difficult to pinpoint because they don't create such a huge immediate response. They're these delayed responses. And we know from the work in autism that they've done, the research, that children with autism particularly can make opiates out of their gluten and their dairy. So opiates are like morphine, for example. Heroin is an opiate. So imagine that if you were drinking milk and eating wheat and you started making morphine, basically, a morphine compound. If the gut isn't able to digest it and it can leak into the bloodstream, those compounds actually can fit in the opiate receptor of the brain, and so you can imagine they could affect pain tolerance and high pain threshold. They can affect foggy thinking and spaciness and inattentiveness, irritability, all sorts of things. And with autism, the research shows that they have an increased amount of opiates in their urine, which means that they are creating opiates at a higher rate than other people are. And so looking at dairy and gluten and actually soy, those three can create these opioid-type compounds. And so one of the things we often see as a really powerful or helpful step to autism is the removal of gluten and dairy as a dietary trial to see what results they might gain from that. And I've seen many things from language improving, certainly digestive disturbances often are improved. It could be attention, it could be hyperactivity. So, again, it's a wide range of areas that might be affected, but you can imagine if you were being impacted, there's many ways you can be negatively impacted from gluten and dairy, but that opiate piece just adds one extra big layer to why people often do well getting rid of it. And it's not just kids with autism. We know that there are other, if you are not breaking down those foods very well, then whether you have autism or not, you might have an increased problem with digesting them. And not only can you not absorb the nutrients very well in that case, but you can actually be making problematic compounds that can make it harder for you to, be healthy and function as you want to be able to think and learn and play.
And just makes me think, when you're running through all that, I'm thinking about the different children and the parents that are listening to this, and each parent thinking, oh, my child has tummy issues. Oh, my child, sometimes I see how they get diarrhea or constipation, all these different things, and then I don't want the parents to go freak out and go, oh, my gosh, my child has, all these different issues. Where do I start? I think I would like to see if we could give them some advice on, when you just heard all of this from Julie, don't you can't just go out and totally change up your whole world. You need to assess, number one, what's going on with your child, right? If we've got somebody that has hyperactivity and they're misbehaving, a parent's going to want to look at certain protocol. If the child has diarrhea and constipation, the parent's going to want to look at maybe some food allergies, right, and do some possible food testing to see if that might be the culprit that's going on there. Yep. And then how about your cooking to heal? That I heard you mention that earlier in our conversation, and I wrote down a note. I thought I have to ask Julie about this. Is this book already published?
Yes, it's a cookbook, but it's also a cooking course. So I teach an all-day workshop, and we put the workshop on DVD. And so it's a cookbook, but also you can download it to your iPad or your phone, so you can have your recipes when you're at the store, and you can look at some cooking videos and things like that. So it's basically a cooking course and a cookbook. And all the recipes are gluten-free and dairy-free and soy-free, and many of them can be egg-free or nut-free with some changes. Yep. And I also work with a lot of other diets, so everything in there is also tagged with whether it's low oxalate or Feingold or fail-safe or body ecology. So I try to, for people that know about these various diets and have to avoid more than one thing, they can very easily look at the cookbook and find the recipes that meet their dietary needs very easily.
Yeah, I think that's a super helpful thing. Now, can they find that through your website, or is it on Amazon, or where can they?
Yeah, they can find it both, but probably my website's always a good place because sometimes I have other specials or things going on, and so they go at nourishinghope.com, they can find all my learning tools there, including the cooking course.
And I have a slide that's showing right now that has your beautiful picture on there with the Golden Gate Bridge in the background, and then I've got your website there. So for those who are interested in sort of exploring some things that Julie might have on her website that could help you with any of the issues that you're having with your children, obviously go to nourishinghope.com, and you can see what resources Julie has there. And then in closing, Julie, I think today's been wonderful, and I'm going to actually send out a recap to our audience of the top things that you talked about today for people that are going to listen later on, and people that might want to just get a recap and go, oh, Julie talked about this, this, and this. You've given us some great tips on how to start feeding our kids. But any last parting things that you might, like a great idea that you had with one of your children to get them to eat something that you just never thought you were going to get a kid to eat a certain food and you had some great success, or any stories like that you can think of?
Sure. I've got two things. One is when you say that, when you give that example, the number one thing is liver.
I hate it.
Every time, everywhere I go, people are turning their nose up. They are freaked out by liver. But
Yes.
when liver is grass-fed or pastured from really healthy animals, it has a lot of nutrients in it. And so one of the most probably successful things that people are always shocked is that kids love my burgers with liver. I've never had a parent say that
Really?
yes. Never has anyone ever said they didn't like them. And every time I see somebody at a conference that has tried those, their kids love them. So
wow.
that would probably be one way to get liver in that you never really expected to be able to do. And then, I don't know if we have the time, but the quick conversation when we look at hyperactivity, salicylates. We didn't really, it's a kind of a big topic, but in a 2-second nutshell, salicylates are these naturally occurring compounds in things like grapes and raisins and apples and berries, and they're wonderfully nutritious foods, but if your biochemistry, again, it goes back to the biochemistry, if your biochemistry doesn't support really great sulfation and some of the other processes that we need to break these down, it can create a lot of hyperactivity, red cheeks, red ears, aggression, and I had one, again, when we talk about the kids with autism, some of them are more, fairly severe, and one of my families had a boy with very extreme aggressive behavior every day, and it turns out that once we looked at the salicylates and removed them, that went from 50 times a day to 1 time during the month or something like that. So
wow,
it might be something to think about. Yeah, if you have a child that loves fruit, that's great, but you might be a little bit suspicious if you're dealing with hyperactivity all the time or aggression or things like that, irritability. You might look into those salicylates and see if they could be playing a role, because to me it's something that people really hardly ever think about, but there, again, like the other topics, there's a lot of science on salicylates for autism and salicylates for ADHD actually as well.
And I think that's a point that often parents ask me about, having become a nutrition coach. They're like, well, can't we have all my kids eat fruit. Isn't it fine to give fruit all the time? I'm like, well, I'm sort of the philosophy of everything in moderation. You don't want to overdose your kids on fruit all the time. They need to learn to have a variety of things in their diet, and especially now that what you're pointing out with the grapes and raisins and those sorts of things, and actually having effect on children's hyperactivity. Obviously, that gives us it just goes back over and over again that our food is really our medicine, and we need to eat our food like, as it nourishes our body and how it's meant to nourish our body. And so I think that's a really good point, and I'm hoping that, I don't know, I thought back on your liver, I'm stuck on that liver hamburger thing right now. I'm going, is that liver a recipe in your Cooking to Heal book?
It is. It
is awesome. Okay, because I think that's a great step. I mean, for those of us moms that are looking to put new things in, I think part of the challenge for parents is finding new ways to cook, because we grew up knowing how to cook whatever our mothers cooked, and then maybe we learned a few things from our friends along the way, but now we as mothers in our 30s and 40s are trying to figure out, what can I feed my child? We keep going back to, and I know I keep going back to the same old standbys. And so any resource like your Cooking to Heal, any kind of resource like that can give me an idea. I never would have thought to include ground up liver in my hamburger. Never would that have crossed my mind. But we need people like you that are, stepping out of bounds and throwing new ideas at us to actually incorporate some new things in our repertoire and try to really broaden that table, that harvest table that we're sitting at. Instead of it, being a 1-by-1 square, it needs to be a 12-foot by 12-foot square of a myriad of things for us to eat. So
absolutely.
I just love it. I think this has been a fantastic interview, Julie, and I hope that you've enjoyed being part of the Healthy Kids Revolution with us. And, for anybody that wants to go find out, again, I've got the slide up here that shows how to find your website, Julie. And we just have so appreciated having you here. Any last parting words you want to share with our audiences?
Well, if they're looking for more information, they can always get my free parents guide, which is 5 articles that I put together.
Awesome.
And so it's a nice place if they want to get started, learn more about it, or share it with a teacher or somebody else. That's probably just a really nice, simple, free resource for parents. And again, you can find that on my website as well.
Awesome. And they just would they put in their email address and boom, it comes right to them? Okay.
Yep, exactly.
All right.
Yep.
That is a great, great giveaway. So, Julie, I really appreciate your time today, and I hope that our parents learned a lot of neat little takeaways, baby steps, to start improving the way they're feeding their children, and we look forward to hearing back from you in the future and, maybe doing some other events with you.
Well, thank you, Carmen. It's been a pleasure. I'm glad I could join you.
Yeah, thank you so much, and I will go ahead and I'll end the recording now, and okay, I've ended it, so I think we're good, Julie. I think that was really super helpful.
Thank you.
I think the parents are going to like this a lot, so